What's up guys, Antoine here at DPR, and this week we're doing the Snake Breeder Series Episode 3, Understanding the Basics. Let's jump right into that. What is that about? Well, it's mostly what you need to know to be successful. You can have the best genetics in the world, you can invest in the nicest animals, have a business plan ready, but if you don't know how to take care of your ball pythons, you're not going to be able to succeed. And we're going to cover 5 different points that are what I feel are most important when it comes to the basics. First and foremost is, the quality of your animals and access to feeders, quality of equipment, maintenance, and then your general knowledge about ball pythons. So if you're ready, let's dive in. So quality of animals is mostly, the quality of your ball python. Not the genetics. We're always looking for the nicest orange dream line, the nicest cypress, best chocolate, but that's really important for branding your business and producing the most, highest quality possible of animals. But what I'm talking here is mostly like the quality of ball python itself. You need to have, animals that are eating well, animals that have strong bloodlines. You don't want to inbreed your collection to a point where you have, you start to have issues. So having those great quality of ball pythons, picking when you buy an animal, picking up an animal that looks healthy, eats well, is free of mites, don't have, any respiratory infections, shedding well, the body itself looks good, there's no bump, there's no broken bones, there's, these are things that you don't see really often, but paying attention to those details can really change something in the long run. We all have some animals that are finicky eaters. We have some animals that, eat always really well, they breed well, they give you always good eggs, and, they are consistent eaters, consistent breeders. These are super valuable animals. A male that breeds like a champion is a valuable male. So these are things that you need to look for when it comes to selecting your ball pythons prior to absolutely anything in this hobby is the quality of ball python. Then if you have quality ball pythons, you will need a good source of feeders. The feeder supply is primordial. Having access to quality rodents all year round is so important. You really want to have rats that are a good quality rodent because that will totally shine in your animal. And not only you need good quality rodent, but most of the time you will need a variety of different feeder types. So let's say you need mice, rats, ASF, you'll need that access at some point. We all have some finicky eaters that will refuse to eat rats on a weekly basis. I have some animals that needs only mice. If I'm not able to get access to those mice, quality mice as well, those animals are not going to eat. So this is really, really important as well. When it comes to getting your rodents, it's really important to have a reliable source of feeders. I'm not saying that breeding your rodents is the only option. It is, in my opinion, one of the best options because you ensure yourself that the rats you're feeding to your animals is, quality controlled. You know exactly what you're giving to your snakes. You'll all need to go through a decision whether you feed live, frozen, or a mix of both. When it comes to live, I would tend to choose a source that's closer to you. The only reason for that is that you don't want your rats to be in transit, in transport for too long, especially when it comes to pinkies, fuzzies, and pups. Those babies, they don't eat on themselves. They will feed directly from the mother. So basically, you want them collected as soon as possible because they will start to lose, their energy and the fat content that they have inside of them. They're basically like the breast milk from the mother. So you want those collected as closely as possible to the feeding time. This will ensure that your rats are juicy and healthy. This is really, really important. When it comes to feeding frozen, it's the same thing. You want to have quality. It gives you a bigger buffer when it comes to where you can get your rats and also for how long you can store them. But I would highly suggest not to keep a rat for over 6 months in the freezer because at some point, it's like a steak. If you put a steak in the freezer for 6 months and you don't, close the bag properly, it's not well insulated, it's just going to freeze or burn, and it's not ideal. You lose some of the vitamins, the minerals, and everything that's good about it. So I would highly suggest not to keep it for too long. Another thing that I see that happens a lot of time to some other breeders, and it did happen to myself, you rely only on one source of rodent. Could be yourself, could be, you buy from a local friend or a local breeder, and then all of a sudden something happens to their collection and they don't breed no more, or they don't have anything available, or they have just a small amount of rats available each week. So that will leave you in big trouble, because now you have, dozens of, if not hundreds of animals that needs to be fed every week. If you're not able to feed them, well, it will 100% affect the outcome at the end of the year. So if you rely only on one person, I feel like this is a risk to take. I would suggest to maybe buy 80% of your rats from somewhere and try to find another 20% from somewhere else, or at least breed 20% of your rats. Let's say you just breed your younger rats for fuzzies and pups for your hatchlings. That way you know that your hatchlings always have what they need. If you need more, you can buy some. But if you're stuck in a very unfortunate situation where your supplier can't give you everything you need, you have a backup. If you buy from somebody else, let's say 20% as well, you can always have that connection, and can always go like, hey, you have more rodents, can I go with more? And this is something that won't let you empty-handed when it comes to rat shortage, because this is a real big deal. And if you don't, think about that right now, you might get caught, and it could be really, really painful for your business. Now that you've had, good quality ball pythons, you're able to feed them, you need a place to store them. That's when good equipment comes at play. It's really nice to have, all these beautiful ARS or freedom breeders and the best, room that you can have as possible. But these are not necessarily the only option you have. You can have some nice, I'll move Emily. You can have some other nice racks that are pretty cool here. They do the job. They're not necessarily made for it. Well, they're made for reptiles, but they're not as convenient as the ARS or the freedom breeder are. But they do the job very, very well. The only thing is, you can always do a DIY, rack system. The only thing, if you're going to invest $30,000 to $40,000 of snakes in one rack, might as well go and pay that extra money to ensure that you have something that's good quality. Because I've heard stories, nightmare stories of people losing collections with, overheating tapes and rack failures, or mold that was getting into the wood of the rack and that created some respiratory infection. There are some terrible stories that can happen, and I've heard before. And buying those, purposely made racks for reptiles and ball pythons is not something that you can overlook. What are other types of equipment you will need? Well, obviously you're going to need an incubator, and this is probably the thing you need to be most careful about, because in the incubator you will put all of your eggs, and the eggs are basically the whole reason why we're doing this. It's to have babies, and you need to have something that's truly reliable, that's not gonna die on you at some point. If you make it custom, I've used a custom incubator in the past, it works really well, but you just need to be extra careful in the way you do it. Buy a good incubator is not something to overlook. I've heard some things about, burst of temperatures, or having parts of the incubator that are not in the same temperatures, and some deformity happened on top of the incubator, closer to the heat, or without. There's a lot of things that can happen. So having a good incubator is also really, really important. Your room, your ball python room, is also one thing that you need to be extra careful about. Whether you're on the basement, ground floor, or a second floor, they will all have some different aspects to it. If you're in the basement, Maybe in the winter, the floor is colder, and maybe your bins at the bottom will be colder than, let's say the top ones. This is something that you need to need to be aware of those things so that you can adjust things. You might want to have another probe at the bottom that will ensure you to have 2 different temperatures in your rack. The air of your room is also one thing. The animals are breathing it all along. You need to have some good air circulation. You need to have fans that are blowing. You need to have, some sort of airflow going. And also, if you have a window in the room, there can be a very cold draft of air that's coming directly on a bin. This is, the worst thing for an RI infection, respiratory infection. So your room is a very, very important aspect of your whole setup. I've heard some people that were in the basement that are really inclined to have, floods, and maybe having, the last 2 rows of your snake bins empty, and you can have some storage there, but having the last 2 rows, if your basement is really inclined to floods, this might be a good option to prevent some drowning in your animals. This is all things that you need to think before it happens. Nobody wants to pay 10 grand for a snake, put it in a bin, and it gets a respiratory infection from being too cold. It drowns from an unfortunate event of like basement flooding. There's a lot of things that can happen. So check out your room and look at every aspects of it that could potentially lead to issues. All right, now that you have good animals, they're fed properly, and they are held in quality racks in a good room, now you'll need to clean them and take care of them. This is super important because this is one of the most overlooked aspects of a lot of breeders. Cleaning your animals regularly and having, fresh water every week, water cup change every week. There's algae. Algae. This is the worst word for a French Canadian to say. Algae, no matter what you want to do, how you want to call it, flip your damn cup. Super important. You need to have fresh water every week. This is super primordial. And, I see some people are like, I'm just going to spot clean here and there, and which is perfectly fine. I do spot clean everything every week, change the water. This is understanding the basic. Cleaning your water is one of the most basic things. Spot clean is, a thing to do every week. You don't want to leave a poo there for too long. But I would also suggest at least minimum once a year, do a whole tub flip and clean the sides, use some disinfectant and clean everything. I would highly suggest to do it more than that, What we try to do here is that at every shed, we flip the substrate and we kind of clean a bit the sides and the water cup. This is one thing that really helps. So that way you don't really have to do like, okay, let's say today, it's the day we need to flip everything, and it's a tedious job. By doing it, on the go, it really helps not having some overload of work at some point in the year. Then you need to understand the care of what's going to happen if my room gets really dry. It does get really, really dry here. We need to humidify our substrate because it gets, really, really dusty and absolutely dry in the winter. So we need to humidify the bins to allow our animals to have really good sheds. It's not, a deal breaker if your snake has some stuck shed here and there. It happens, but you don't want to have that to accumulate over time. So that was a bit of like, making sure that you guys understand that cleaning your animal might be a tedious job, but if you're not doing it, you're not going to go anywhere, and it's going to show in the quality of your animals. Their animals will not breed as best as they would if you're not switching the bins all of the time. Even switching bins and flipping the substrate, having new clean substrate all the time will trigger your animals to eat more. This is a trick that I've learned that is absolutely amazing. You have a snake that doesn't eat that well, flip the bin, clean everything, put it in a cup for like overnight, put it back in the bin, fresh new substrate, bam, bam, it will eat again. This is a thing that really, really helps also. All right, guys, now we're at the 5th point of this series, and it's knowledge about ball pythons in general. You'll need to understand the breeding cycles in order to really get to know when to pair, when to start to look at things. You can always have good signs of ovulation or some sort, but when you have a good understanding of that whole cycle, you will really know where to lead your collection. when to start pairing your males, when to start expecting things. This is also something that you'll need to do your research prior to be breeding ball pythons. And you can always learn more. We always add new things to our weekly routine all over the years. It's just a ongoing science that you need to perfect every season. Another thing that I'll suggest take more time into studying is the ball python general anatomy. Might seem a little weird, but on the other hand, if something happens to your animal, you buy a new snake that has something, if you know very well what a ball python should look like, a healthy ball python, you'll know what I'm talking about. Like, if you have, let's say, a prolapse or something, you'll know what to do if you understand the anatomy of it. And if somebody says like, oh, this snake had that in the past, you'll be able to understand if it is it something that's dangerous for my animal? Is it something that could be an issue? There's rats or molding snakes, and could that be an issue as well? So understanding that anatomy is really, really helpful. The better you know your animals in the most tiny details, you will be able to have more success in the end when it comes to breeding your snakes. Understanding your animal is primordial when it comes to breeding. Knowing what to look for also is really, really important. I will have some people that breeds only with their eyes. They don't really palpate. They don't really use ultrasound. They mostly look at their animals. If the animal is standing in the front, always looking for food, it might be a sign of good follicle development. If the animal is in the back, it's coiled, might be wrapping around, itself and developing great follicles. Stuck on the water bowl, it's coiling itself. So there's a lot of signs that you can look for in your snakes, in your bin, to direct exactly what's going on with your snakes. They will show you what they want and how they are doing, and everything is there. You just need to know what to look for, and this is a skill that you will learn over time, but be extra careful about that and pay attention to those details. Your animals at some point could get sick, could get infection, could get mites, or a lot of other diseases. So it's really nice to have a great understanding of how to recognize them, what to do if you have something, a respiratory infection, mites, or whatever, and what are the possible other things that could happen to your animals. There's a bunch of things that could happen and go wrong, like scale rot, prolapses, hemipenis infections, egg bounce. There are many things that could happen, and having a good understanding of that, learning the basics of the general issues and injuries or diseases that ball python can get is really a good thing in order to be successful. All right, the very last point, and this is one of the most important one, is knowing your equipment. Knowing how your thermostat works, how your rack works, and how your incubator work is super important. You will need some setups. You will need to be looking for things and checking for electronic failures. These are things that you need to look every day. I'll say this: check your things, and check your things all the time. Having a thermostat that fails could ruin your entire collection. Every day you enter your room, I've said that in previous videos, but every single time you enter your room, you should look at your thermostats and look at your data. Touch your animals. If your animal feels cold when you're cleaning, might mean that you have some heat tape that are failing, or there could be a lot of things that are going wrong in your room. So checking your setups and being looking at the nitty-gritty of it is super important. All right, guys, now that I've done this video, I really feel like I should do a dive into all of the aspects about the knowledge part of it that I said. I think I'm going to do eventually a video about the breeding cycle, what to check for with the device, maybe rating some of the system I use, some of the equipment I use, how to feed, how to, I will eventually do videos for each of these points. Right now, I feel like there's most likely good amounts of videos on YouTube or article online about that subject, but I'll redo it myself eventually. If you enjoyed that video, I know it's a long video, there's a lot of information there. If you enjoyed it, be sure to go down in a comment and let me know what you think on this. Subscribe, YouTube, Instagram, and we'll see you next week. Cheers and stay tuned.